It's going to involve 20,000 people, and it's going to cost less than 200
That's
million quid
estimate.
for a deal that is going to generate multiples of that if it generates
That's their estimate.
trade.
And of course, there are big tariff wins on whiskey, which I applaud, and on cars. But it comes back to, at the same time that the government is genuinely not listening to business about job creation in this country, the Indian government is trumpeting this as being unprecedented. So that's why there's a bit of a reaction the other way. I mean, Rebecca is absolutely right. Labour, instead of talking about reshuffles, which, by the way, stops all these ministers getting on with their job, should be focused on things like winter fuel payments, and pensioners feel the trust has been broken.
Therese, I've got to cut you off now just because I'm being told I've really got to go to Anushka.
Thank you. One issue for the government right now is huge pessimism. People were asked for this about a series of factors, whether they had got better or worse over 10 years. And for the net percentage, we don't even need a better offside to the chart because nothing scored above zero. People are feeling pretty grim. They think that public transport, waste collection, their local council, police, council housing, social care, prisons, but most of all, roads have got worse over the past decade. And fascinatingly, you can break this down further by who people vote for, and a very clear pattern emerges. The most optimistic, or should I say least pessimistic, because, as I said, it is all negative, are Labour voters, followed by Tories here in blue. People turning to the Lib Dems in yellow are more pessimistic. They're actually the most down when it comes to public transport, but also here, social care. So maybe Leader Ed Davies' focus on that is cutting through. But in most cases, it is the turquoise circle that is furthest out. Reform voters are most likely to feel negative, off the charts for roads, prisons, council housing, police, local council, and here collecting our bins. Maybe that's why people voted for them to take over councils. The question, of course, is now, will Reform do a better job on those things?
So, Daisy, it is really striking how many voters, on really fundamental things, believe that Britain just isn't working. Some of this, let's be absolutely clear, was inherited from the Tory government. But is there any chance that Starmer can persuade people by the time of the next election that these things are moving decisively in the right direction?
Well, time will tell. I mean, if I think back to the general election last year, everybody said on the doorstep, everything is broken, nothing works. I can't see a GP, I can't see a dentist, I can't get a school place for my child, I can't get an education care plan. I'm picking up the pieces of a broken social care system.
And what do you say when you talk to people in your constituency now? What do they say?
10 months on, it's still the same. And I think the problem is that the country was promised change and they're not seeing it, they're not feeling it. And so, the government has really got to change course and deliver some quick wins to show that they can actually change people's lives. They're focusing on some of the longer term things. And of course, every government needs to do the longer term stuff, but focusing on things that make a direct impact on people's lives right now is something that they could be doing. And the announcement about pushing social care into the long grass is really frustrating. We've opposed many of those taxes that Rebecca's been talking about, about winter fuel payments, and just the kind of the hatchet job of some of the measures like, the family farm tax, where, there was, arguably, they were trying to do a good thing in trying to close a loophole, but in doing so, managed to really, bring real terror and peril to a number of family farms. It's really kind of half-baked policies that haven't been thought through, and they're causing a huge amount of damage. Now,
I've got so much more that I need to talk to all of you about, but ITV has to earn some money. So we're going to a quick break, and we'll see you again in just a minute or two.
Hello, welcome back to the break. Hashtag Peston. We're going to have a parliamentary conclave. Is that OK? Is it OK for us to talk about this?
Yeah.
Of course, we have a papal conclave. I didn't know if it's polite or not, given, you know, it's quite a serious thing taking place. But I want to ask if we could elect a parliamentary pope. Who is there in Parliament who offers good moral guidance, who's willing to offer life advice, who takes your hand and guides you through your day-to-day work? Who would you vote for? Who stand out in Parliament?
I think the Speaker is automatically the equivalent of the Pope, because in effect he gets to make decisions on big things, and you can't challenge the view of the Speaker. So I think it's automatically Lindsay Hoyle.
You can't challenge the view, but some people challenge the view of the Pope.
Well, they might challenge the view, but they don't get anywhere.
Have you tried to challenge the view of the Speaker?
I think in the past there have been some interactions, but ultimately the Speaker's view is...
I'm having flashbacks here, Therese.
Well, I think more in the Burko days, but there we go.
Daisy?
I'd probably go for a former MP. I'd actually probably go for Peter Bottomley, who was a Conservative, because even though our views differed on lots of things, I genuinely thought that on a lot of issues, particularly during all the chaos of the last Parliament, he brought a lot of calm and a bit of wisdom. And on the kind of cladding fire safety issue, where I worked with him, I think he had a very, very strong moral compass, so I'd probably go for Peter.
OK.
Well, first off, as a Catholic, this is literally like Celebrity Big Brother for Catholics watching the conclave. It's very exciting.
Who are you backing?
Except the cameras aren't on
I don't know, because you should have the one that doesn't want to be the Pope. That's
Yeah.
the
Did
rule.
you like the film?
Yeah, it was really good.
I loved it.
But no parliamentary popes, I don't think there's a lot of good MPs who've got good hearts, but they're not really at Pope level.
No one's at Pope level?
No.
No good socialist Pope?
No, there's no one really at Pope level yet. One
nobody
day maybe
infallible, is
we'll
there?
get a Pope level politician, but we've not got there yet.
OK, absolutely none of them. And obviously, famously, we wait for the black smoke, as we've seen. We wait for the white smoke, which tells us good things. Are there any traditions like that that you think Parliament could do with?
Oh, gosh.
We've only
We've
got
got
30
enough
seconds.
traditions in Parliament, I think I don't need any more.
There certainly are traditions.
Yeah.
Too many recently of the chairman of the 22 standing up in front of the TV
Nothing
camera.
else you would like? We haven't got enough time.
I mean, the state of Parliament as a building is a bit worrying. So if we saw white smoke from Parliament, you have to call the fire engines, I think.
All right, bye.
So, welcome back. We've got a treat coming up, which I think Anushka's going to foreshadow.
Oh, I thought I was the treat.
You're always the treat.
We've talked about English local elections. Let's talk about Scotland. Labour is not doing very well up there either. The SNP are back up. This is some polling of voting intention in Holyrood elections. Now, people get 2 votes. First, they get a constituency vote, a first-past-the-post system to elect your local MSP. So this is polling on voting intention for that starting in 2022 when the SNP in yellow were ahead. Actually, Labour and the Tories here were neck and neck back then. You can see that we saw a decline in the SNP and Labour came back. But now that has reversed. You can see the SNP have started to recover. Labour has nose-dived and Reform here have come out of nowhere right up against the Tories. The other type of vote is a proportional one for a regional list of MSPs. Here, Labour actually came from behind the Tories, again, to very briefly top the polls, but again, not for long. This time, the SNP flatter, but Labour down. And I think there, Reform have actually just nosed it and passed the Tories. In fact, there was one of those big MRP polls today, and Reform had actually leapfrogged Labour, putting the SNP in the lead on 58 seats, just less than where they are at the moment, and Reform in second on 21 seats. But the SNP are not exactly delivering on their promises in Holyrood either. They set a statutory target, so a legal one, to bring down the child poverty rate. The ultimate target was here, 10% by 2030-31, with an interim target of 18% in 2023. This is the reality. You can see it has jumped up and down, and it is still 4% above the first target. IPPR Scotland have done a projection of where they land eventually, and they have them at 22% by the end of the decade, more than twice as high as they have promised. IPPR say that is in part because benefits are not rising at the same rate as wages and housing costs, and they are not convinced that specific employment policies will close that gap.
Thanks so much, Anushka. Now, the tweet I was referring to is a little earlier I had the privilege of speaking with the First Minister of Scotland, John Swinney. Now, I began by pointing out to him what Anushka's just shown you, that he's miles off hitting his government's target to reduce child poverty. So I wondered whether he would uprate benefits by more than the rate of inflation.
We're making positive progress in Scotland on reducing child poverty. In fact, Scotland's
but nowhere
the only
near
part
what
of the
you
United
promised to
Kingdom
do,
where
though, First Minister.
Well, we've got to make as much progress as we can within the resources that are available to us. So we're seeing child poverty rates falling in Scotland. We've got child poverty rates in Scotland about 9% below the rest of the UK, and in the rest of the UK, child poverty rates are expected to rise. So we're going in the right direction. We're also taking steps which I thought the Labour government might have taken to lift the two-child benefit cap, which would have helped to keep even more children out of poverty, but the UK government has said no to doing that, and we are now taking the steps within the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Government to lift that cap so that we can keep more children out of poverty.
On what planet does a progressive government encourage people to drink on trains, lift the ban on drinking on trains? I mean, we all know alcoholism is a terrible problem wherever we are. Police are worried about it. Charities representing women are worried about it. Why have you decided to do that?
Well, this ban, we have come to the conclusion, is essentially unenforceable. It's a hangover from the COVID period, and it's one of the last remaining restrictions that we have in place arising from that time. And we don't think it's working. We think it puts too much conflict into public transport when people, for staff that are working on the system, and indeed staff are telling us in the rail network that it is an unenforceable ban. So they're obviously
why are the Transport Police concerned about it?
Well, we have the ability to regulate behaviour on trains through the work of the British Transport Police, and we have also the ability to regulate for the times in which alcohol can be consumed on trains in particular circumstances. But what we find is that the blanket ban, alongside responsible consumption of alcohol, is something that can be sustained on the rail network in Scotland. And we're trying to essentially regularise that situation to where the situation was pre-COVID.
I've got two or three other questions which you're absolutely welcome to answer as briefly as you possibly can. One of them relates to Nicola Sturgeon saying that the Supreme Court decision makes life for trans people almost unlivable, in her words. She's your predecessor. Will you take her advice effectively and try and help trans people in Scotland?
Well, I want to make sure that everybody in Scotland feels at home, and that means I've got to work to protect the rights of everybody, including trans people. So we'll do that whilst we take forward and implement the conclusions of the Supreme Court judgment. I accept the Supreme Court judgment. It's the ultimate
you accept
court
the Supreme
in the
Court
United Kingdom, and it's defined.
You accept the judgment, so just explain how you're going to, in a sense, mitigate it or make life easier for trans people.
Well, what we'll do is we obviously, what follows from the Supreme Court judgment, which we accept, is that there has to be guidance developed by the Equalities and Human Rights Commission. We're in dialogue with the EHRC on the formulation of that guidance, and we have to make sure that obviously they're the regulator, they're the final decision makers, their regulation goes to UK ministers for approval, and we've got to work within that guidance to make sure that we protect and support the rights of all.
Daisy, if I could come to you on that last issue, which is how abandoned many trans people feel. What do you think governments in Scotland and Westminster should now do to support the trans community?
Well, look, we as a party respect the Supreme Court judgment. We believe in the rule of law. But it does throw up a lot of questions because it's not entirely clear, given that trans people have a legal right not to be discriminated against. It's not at all clear what this actually means in practice. And so we do now need the government to bring forward that guidance to clarify precisely how service providers can ensure that trans people's rights are upheld as well.
But practically, what could that involve?
Well, we need the government to bring that guidance forward. I mean, there are genuine questions now that a lot of trans people are feeling very under attack, and they simply do not know how they can access public services. They don't know what rights they have. They don't know which toilet they're allowed to use. They don't know, other spaces that they can and can't use either. And for many people, there's been protections in place for 20 years or so. A lot of trans people were using particular, public spaces, and now they're being told that they suddenly can't use them. So it does give rise to a lot of questions for those people, and we just need the government to bring forward that clarification and that guidance for service providers and for trans people, because many of them are feeling incredibly scared and concerned at the moment.
What all political leaders at the moment are saying, Becky, is they, quote, respect the Supreme Court's judgment, but there's no hiding that your leader, Keir Starmer's position on trans has shifted quite significantly in the last few years. Does that disappoint you?
I think he's bound to respect the Supreme Court judgment, but I don't think that negates the reality of the situation, that this has been an extremely toxic and divisive debate with little room for sensible or reasonable conversation. And the reality is that it's led to an increase in transphobia and the trans community feeling discriminated against and feeling quite frightened. And I had a meeting last week in my office with members of the trans community in Salford, and they're absolutely terrified at the implications of the Supreme Court judgment, because there hasn't been any realistic guidance set out by the EHRC yet to determine how they can live their lives peacefully, free from fear, free from discrimination. So there's a huge question mark at the moment, and that's what I hope the government gets on with now, in making sure that we set out very clearly how we're going to protect those individuals' rights going forward.
Therese, if you'll forgive me, I'm going to come back to you after the break, because we're just going to go, as I say, for a little break to adverts, but we'll be back in a second with more from Swinney and more from my brilliant other guests. See you in a minute.
Welcome to the break. We do come up with some odd connections. I mean, great, but odd connections. So, Donald Trump has put 100% tariffs on exports of foreign movies. Has threatened to.
Threatened to, hasn't done it yet.
Threatened to. Which has led Ed Davey, your leader, to suggest that he is attacking James Bond, Bridget Jones and Paddington Bear. So, what better for us to talk about but who you think in Parliament best fits these characters? And we've got a few extra in there as well. So, what about James Bond? Suave, charming, maybe a bit dangerous. Anyone fit the bill?
Well, all I'm going to say is I've seen Ed Davey fall off a few boats.
Are you comparing Ed Davey to James Bond?
I'd quite like to see him. I'd quite like to see him go down the Millennium Dome, like Pierce Brosnan did.
I'd say he's more Paddington than... Oh, is that mean?
Maybe a James Bond Paddington cross. There you go.
Come on, who is it?
Well, I would say in the Lords.
No Pope, no James Bond.
No.
Oh, here we go. We've got one.
Mark Lancaster is
Lancaster.
Used to be an MP. He's now in the Lords. He's also now a general. He's very senior.
And a spy.
So he's quite a smooth character, I think. So
bet
I'm
you
sure
there's-
he'll love that.
I bet you there's a lot of male MPs who would identify as being a bit like James Bond.
Yeah.
We can't think who they are.
And Caroline Darnish's husband, so she might be happy as well.
What about Bridget? Bridget Jones, funny,
Look, the problem is that
chaotic.
Bridget has big knickers, and you don't really want to compare anybody to that, do you? So it's,
But let's just
it's not going to happen.
Let's just not compare on the knickers. Let's compare on the personality. Is there a Bridget Jones in Parliament?
She's a great character. Apart from the big knickers, I actually think Bridget Jones in her latest movie dresses very smartly, very
I
empathetic.
actually haven't watched it. Must watch that. What? Great, I know. Is Keir Starmer like Mark Darcy? Some say that it's based on Keir Starmer.
I don't see it.
Sometimes you just have to laugh, Becky, and it tells us exactly what you mean.
Well, what we do know is that Bernard Jenkins is the basis of the character, several of Richard Curtis's characters called Bernard.
Is he?
He is, because
Who knew?
Richard Curtis went out with Anne Jenkins at one point.
Oh. I've only got 20 seconds. Any Willy Wonkers? I've been told to cut.
So, welcome back. There's a little bit of a bonus part of my interview with the First Minister of Scotland, John Swinney. Now, he recently described the values of Nigel Farage as, his words, alien. So I asked him what he made of recent polls that suggest as many as 1 in 5 of Scottish voters would back Farage's Reform Party. Wasn't he denigrating his Scots colleagues, his Scots citizens?
Well, I'm not denigrating any of my fellow citizens. What I'm denigrating is the politics of Nigel Farage. And what I've got to do, what my challenge is to reach people and to demonstrate that Farage offers simplistic approaches that won't work, that scapegoat individuals within our society. And what we've got to have is a reasoned debate in Scotland based on our values to make sure that we have a democratic, compassionate, values-based society that meets the needs of individuals and gives people hope and optimism about the future. Nigel Farage is one of the key architects of Brexit, and Brexit has been the source of all the economic worries that individuals face in our society today. Why are living standards not rising in Scotland today? It's because of Brexit. And because of Brexit, the product of Nigel Farage's politics, people are suffering. Well, the answer to that is not to vote for more of Nigel Farage. The answer is for Scotland to be in a position to decide our own future and to be able to take decisions that will be right for the people of Scotland. And that's the message I've got to get out to people in Scotland in the course of the period ahead, and particularly in the run-up to the elections next May.
Do you not worry that using words like alien, you know, it's not unlike Hillary Clinton talking about Trump supporters as deplorables, that this will hurt you?
What I want to do is to set out an alternative vision, to essentially put out to people in Scotland, to everyone in Scotland, a message of that their government in Scotland is focused on delivering on their priorities and is offering hope about the future. And that lies at the heart of what I was setting out to Parliament yesterday, what I've been setting out to the country today.
And then finally, on one of President Trump's less momentous ambitions, he wants the Open to be at his Turnberry golf course. Would you support the Open at Turnberry?
We've got a tremendous record of hosting major international gatherings in Scotland. If the Royal Nation decide to bring the Open to Turnberry, then of course we'll work collaboratively to make that happen, because I want Scotland to be an outward-looking country that's able to be a host to people around the world. We've been really good at that as a country over many years, and I want to make sure we continue that in the years to come.
And so, if he came to Turnberry, you'd give the American president a great big Scottish hug?
Well, we've got, we've got that. I don't know what decision making the Royal Nation will come to, but whatever they decide, we'll work to make sure that Scotland is an attractive place for people to visit.
First Minister, as always, thanks very much for joining us tonight. So, Therese, is the way to campaign against reform to, characterise their values as alien?
Well, I think I mentioned earlier, I think a lot of the votes are there are a reaction, with people thinking the two main parties aren't delivering or haven't delivered. And I think it's a message.
But is that the right way to deal with any party that's not your own, to try and understand why people support them rather than just denigrating in that way?
Well, indeed. I mean, I agree with your assessment. Denigrating doesn't get anywhere. But I do think it's important that my own party, after a big defeat last year, big defeat last week, but nevertheless, we still have to go through that process and re-establish that trust with the British public, and show that we can be the party that, if Labour isn't working, I don't think they are working, can be trusted again to have learned the lessons and to get back on with the recovery of the country.
Becky, we talked at length about your concerns about a number of policies that have alienated many supporters. Do you get any sense that Starmer is going to shift?
I really, really hope that he does, and I hope that he can see...
But are there any signals from Downing Street that they're listening?
Not yet, no, not yet. But it's early days. But certainly the polling, as I mentioned earlier, that came out over the weekend that showed that potentially we were going to lose our core base to various different parties. We were also losing people to Reform who were going to Reform because they thought that Reform was offering a more progressive, left-leaning economic agenda. Now, we know that's not the truth, but that's what they believed, and that's where they believed Labour should be in terms of setting out a real industrial strategy, investing in our regions and nations, making sure that we had affordable electricity and utilities that were in public ownership, all things that were fundamental ABC Labour policies previously, and that we certainly need to be looking at now.
Daisy, sadly we're almost out of time. One of the things that struck me when sitting in the studio with Anushka overnight on election night was if you looked at the votes, there was a majority on the left. If you put together Greens, Lib Dems, Labour, SNP Plaid, there was a majority on the left. And yet, rather than exploiting that, the government, Starmer, has tacked to the right. Are you surprised that they tacked to the right rather than the left?
I think we're very disappointed. I mean, the fact is that we know that the Conservative Party has been trying to mirror Nigel Farage, and we really hope that the Prime Minister of the Labour Party doesn't. We Liberal Democrats feel that we've done particularly well in these local elections, in part because we've been a very distinctive voice, saying we should stand up to Donald Trump and all the rest of it, get a closer relationship with Europe, and we hope very much the Prime Minister will listen.
Now, very sadly, we're out of time. That's it. You may have seen on social media that the new Reform Mayor, Andrea Jenkins, was supposed to be on the show tonight. If you're on your way, Andrea, sadly, you've missed the show. Goodbye.